today we are going to be doing another ranking video, and I actually got reminded to do this from Amy Loves Makeup. She did this video a little while ago. I will have her video linked down below in my description box, but what she did was she ranked all of her Menagerie Cosmetics palettes, and so that is what I'm going to do as well, because I have all of the ones that have been released. I don't think it's going to be super hard, but I definitely am going to have to make some pretty tough decisions. So I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So they've come out with 7 palettes. You've probably seen all of these if you've been on my channel for a while, because I absolutely love these. These are some of my favorite palettes in my collection, so I think we should just get into it. In the last spot, I don't think that any of you are really going to be that surprised that this palette ended up on the bottom, and this is going to be the Killer Purr palette. This is the most neutral palette that Menagerie has, and that is simply the only reason why this ended up being on the bottom, because these aren't really my colors. You guys know that, and I also don't really like the shimmers in this palette, because bronze shimmers are like my least favorite color eyeshadow ever. Like, it's just, to me, it's just so boring. So this palette doesn't really speak to me as much as the other ones. Now the quality is great, I do really like this palette, but the color story alone is just, it's not something that I would ever see myself reaching for just for using this palette. But this palette does have a lot of really beautiful shades that I would use along with something else. Like this yellow up here is stunning. So is this teal. I love this teal. I also love this very dark kind of grungy green. Such a beautiful green. Also, these mattes are really, really nice. They're very unique and their undertones are really, really pretty. But as a standalone palette, this is not something that I'm going to be excited to do a look with, so that is the only reason why this ended up on the bottom. And I feel like I don't need to say this, but I obviously love all of these palettes, so just because something ends up being lower down than others doesn't mean that I don't like them. Also, I did film this look for IGTV, so it will be up on my Instagram. I don't know if it's going to be up when this video is going up, but it definitely is going to be coming. So if you want to see how I got this look, follow me on Instagram. If you don't have Instagram and you do want to see it, do let me know, and maybe I can make a post about it on my community page. Moving on, next up we have one of the mini palettes, and I think that you guys are probably going to be expecting me to put this one higher up than the other mini palette, but actually in my number 6 spot is going to be the Violet Ink palette. Here's what the palette looks like. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this palette, but I've said many times in the past that I don't see these kind of palettes as standalone palettes, and since I am ranking them based on what they are as a palette and not what they can be along with something else, this is just a little bit too one-dimensional for my liking. Again, it's beautiful used with something else, but I don't really do a lot of very monochromatic looks. Sometimes I do, but it's not something that I really like to do on a daily basis. I tend to want to experiment a little bit more and just play with more color combinations. So for me, this is just a little bit boring on its own. Like I said, not a bad palette at all. It's just not something that I'm going to be making looks with just using that palette. And I think the same can actually be said for the next palette, and this is going to be the other mini palette. So I think this is called the Micro palette. This is the Courtship palette. Here's what the palette looks like. This is the outside of it. It has flamingos on the cover. It's just so cute. But the only reason why this palette actually made it higher up than the Violet Ink palette is because of this shadow right here. I freaking love this shadow. This is one of my best shades in my collection. It's just, oh, it's called Besties. I will give you a quick swatch of this. But this is just such a stunning duochrome. I don't know if the camera is really going to do this any justice, but it is just, oh, it's so pretty. I want to bathe in this. Every time I use this color, it just makes me happy. I seriously travel with this palette just for that shadow so I can use it. That's how much I love it, and that's why that palette didn't end up lower down on my list, even though like the rest of the color story in this palette is not really my jam, but that color, it's just so pretty. Next on my list, this is going to be the number 4 spot, and this is their newest palette. This is the Pastel Pop palette. Only reason this didn't end up higher up on my list, it's beautiful, it's great quality. I'm just not really that into pastels. I mean, I like pastels, but I don't really like all pastel looks. Usually for me, pastels are more of a transition color, so if I were to use this palette just on its own, I mean, I did create 3 beautiful looks with this palette, probably 4 because I did a first impression as well, and I really, really do like it. I love that there's a black in here. It's a beautiful palette. It's just that it's not something that I can see myself doing a lot more looks with just using this palette, whereas the top 3 are all, like, for me at least, very cohesive color stories that all lend themselves to make really beautiful looks with just using that one palette. So for my number 3 spot, this is a palette that definitely caused a little bit of controversy, and this is the Referral palette. So here's what the cover looks like. It's so beautiful. And this is the color story. Now the reason why I said that this caused a little bit of drama is because this is not how the palette originally came. It actually came with 2 other shades instead of these 2. But so many people complained and said that the top row was kind of repetitive and there were too many just very light neutral shades, and nobody really wanted that, because when they sneak peeked the palette, they showed these 2 rows first and everybody got so excited. And then once they showed that top row, which were all neutrals, people kind of went crazy, me included, because I was like, that sucks, like the palette has so much potential. So what the owner did is she put in these 2 colors instead and sent it to all of the people for free. If you lived in the States and you wanted these colors, you just had to pay for shipping, I'm pretty sure. But a lot of people who lived out of the States were really upset because they weren't able to actually get them for free because of the shipping and yada yada yada. So yeah, anyway, I really like this palette. I think the color story in here is so beautiful. It is so unique from anything else that I have in my collection. I can't think of a single other palette that I have that is even remotely similar to this. Like, this is just, it's just something else. And even though it's a little bit tricky to come up with looks, I just find that whenever you play with this palette and you just work with it, like the looks just kind of come together. And all of these colors individually are so beautiful. This color is so stunning. This color is also really beautiful. Love this teal up here. I love this palette so much. And I think that this is the favorite artwork that has been done on any of her palettes. I think this is my favorite because it's just so unique and so different. For the number 2 spot, I think that you guys probably know what my number 1 and my number 2 is now, but my number 2 palette is going to go to the Whale Song palette. Here's what the color story looks like. The quality of this palette is superb. I love the shimmers in this. These are some of the best shimmers that she has made, in my opinion. Sometimes I struggle a little bit with the shimmers from Menagerie just because they're a little bit on the crumbly side, but some of these are just incredible, and I love how pigmented this palette is. It's everything that I would ever want in an eyeshadow palette, and I'm just obsessed with a lot of these colors. I mean, this color right here is just so stunning and so grungy and so unlike what I have in other palettes. Both of these 2 shimmers are just, oh, they're so smooth and just, they look so beautiful on the eyes. Like, oh, especially this color right here is literally everything. I could die to do a chromeness, and that is just so stunning. But let's talk about the palette that is my number 1 palette from Menagerie. And I've said this so many times in the past that this palette has a very special place in my heart because this is the first palette that I ever reviewed on my channel. This is the Dragon Child palette. And so for that reason alone, like, I think I'm always going to have a soft spot for this palette because it's just, it started something for me that I never thought it would, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't think that I would ever get to a place where I am today with my YouTube channel, and I feel like I can kind of thank this palette for that because this was the first review that I ever did, and the video actually did pretty good as well. And I also just love the color story in this. I'm so sad that this is discontinued, and I just love this palette so much. I love the blues in here. I love the reds in here. The reds are stunning. I love these purples. There's nothing I don't like about this palette. I just think that, oh, look at it. Like, isn't that just so unique? Have you seen a palette and a color story like that before? I just love it so much, and this is just my favorite. I can't help it. It's just, I love it. So those were my rankings of my Menagerie palettes. Let me know if you were surprised by any of them. Let me know what your rankings would be if you have a couple of these palettes. I would love to know. If you want to see some other ranking videos that I've done, here's a few more. And if you're new, I would love it if you would consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.